The military hospital sat just beyond the outer security ring of the base, a low concrete structure built more for function than comfort. Its walls had absorbed years of war, dust carried by rotor wash, echoes of wounded men brought in at all hours, and the quiet weight of lives saved and lost. For the Marines stationed nearby, the hospital was sacred ground. It was where brothers were stitched back together, where fear softened into hope. On a warm morning thick with desert haze, a new nurse walked through its sliding doors. Her name, according to the paperwork clipped neatly to her uniform, was Lieutenant Ava Morgan. She moved without rush, without hesitation, her boots striking the floor softly enough to go unnoticed. She carried no visible nervousness, no eagerness to impress. If anything, she blended in too well. The Marines at the security desk barely looked up as she passed. To them, she was just another addition to the rotating medical staff. The Marines from the nearby barracks filtered in and out throughout the day, guard duty injuries, training accidents, the occasional evac from the field. They were used to seeing fear in new faces. Fresh doctors fumbled with gloves. Rookie nurses hesitated when the wounded screamed. Ava did neither. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm. When chaos erupted in trauma rooms, she didn't raise her voice, yet people listened. "Who's the new nurse?" One Marine asked another as Ava wheeled a patient down the hall. "Don't know," came the answer, quiet one. That was true. Ava spoke only when necessary. She listened far more than she talked. She memorized names quickly, patients, guards, doctors, but never repeated them unnecessarily. She learned shift schedules by observation alone. She noted which doors were locked at night, which alarms lagged by seconds, which corridors echoed louder than others. To anyone watching closely, it might have seemed obsessive. No one was watching closely. The Marines trusted the hospital. They trusted routine. And routine was exactly what Ava used to disappear into the background. During her first mass casualty intake, a transport helicopter arrived unannounced with wounded from a roadside ambush. Blood-coated stretchers, voices overlapped. The air thickened with urgency. A young corpsman froze, unsure which patient to prioritize. Ava stepped in without being asked. She assessed injuries in seconds, redirected staff, and cleared a path through the chaos. Later, a senior nurse asked where she had trained. "Stateside," Ava answered simply. That was true, it just wasn't the whole truth. In quieter moments, Marines caught glimpses of her doing things that didn't fit the picture. She checked exits twice before sitting. She always chose a seat with her back to a wall. When loud noises echoed from the flight line, she didn't flinch, she adjusted her stance. Once, during a routine security drill, Ava completed the evacuation route faster than anyone else, despite claiming it was her first drill at the facility. The Marines laughed it off. "Guess she's just efficient," one said. Efficiency was a word Ava liked. It explained everything without revealing anything. At night, when the hospital dimmed and the halls emptied, Ava walked the building slowly. To the cameras, it looked like a nurse checking on patients. In reality, she counted steps between corners. She tested door hinges for noise. She identified choke points and blind spots. She noticed which security guards stayed alert near dawn and which relied too heavily on coffee and habit. The base command believed the hospital was a low-risk target. The surrounding units, primarily elements of the United States Marine Corps, handled perimeter defense. Inside, only light security remained. After all, who would attack a hospital? Ava knew the answer. Someone who wanted chaos. Someone who understood psychology. Someone who knew that the fastest way to break morale was not to hit soldiers on the battlefield, but when they were wounded, vulnerable, and unarmed. She had seen it before, in other places, under different names. During a routine shift change, Ava passed a mirror in a supply room. For a brief moment, she looked at her reflection, not as the staff saw her, but as she truly was. The uniform hid old scars. The calm expression hid years of discipline forged under pressure. The quiet hid experience earned where mistakes meant death. She adjusted her cap and turned away. That version of herself didn't exist here, not officially. By her third week, the Marines had grown used to her presence. She was no longer the new nurse. She was just Morgan, the one you wanted nearby when things went bad, the one who didn't panic, the one who somehow made everyone else steadier just by being there. That was the danger of Ava Morgan. She made people feel safe. Late one evening, as the sun bled out across the horizon, Ava paused near the emergency entrance. A supply truck idled outside longer than usual. Its engine pitch felt wrong. The driver didn't get out immediately. Ava watched from behind the glass, her expression neutral, her pulse slow. She didn't react, not yet. She turned and walked back into the hospital, already adjusting possibilities in her mind. Contingencies layered upon contingencies. If nothing happened, fine. If something did, she would act. Because Ava Morgan wasn't here by accident. She hadn't come to heal alone. She had come because, somewhere deep beneath routine and assumption, she knew the truth. This hospital was standing on borrowed peace. And peace never lasted long. The next morning, the hospital hummed with activity. Wounded Marines arrived from a base training accident, some with minor injuries, others with deep lacerations and broken bones. Ava Morgan moved through the chaos with a fluidity that seemed unnatural for someone fresh out of nursing school. Her hands never trembled. Her eyes scanned each patient, noting vital signs and subtle tells. A rise in pulse, shallow breathing, the slight widening of eyes that signaled pain or panic. Corpsmen and junior nurses watched her work, awed and slightly unnerved. "How does she know what to do before anyone tells her?" whispered one. Another shrugged. "Maybe she's just a prodigy." But they weren't quite sure. There was something else in the way she observed the room, something that made the Marines instinctively follow her guidance without understanding why. The hospital, normally sterile and predictable, had become a controlled chaos that Ava managed silently. She anticipated which patients would deteriorate, which machines might fail, and which doors would need to be locked if an emergency arose. Even during routine procedures, she positioned gurneys and wheelchairs in patterns that provided both efficiency and subtle tactical advantage, though no one noticed. She wasn't doing it to impress anyone. She was preparing, unconsciously, for an event that everyone else thought impossible: the hospital under attack. Midday brought a helicopter evacuation. 3 casualties, burned and bleeding, arrived in succession. Doctors barked orders. Nurses sprinted with stretchers. Ava moved at the center of it all, calm, commanding, precise. When one Marine tried to prioritize the wrong patient, she placed a steady hand on his shoulder, guiding him to the correct stretcher with a single word: "Here." No argument, no hesitation. The Marine obeyed instantly, confusion giving way to respect. During a brief lull, she reviewed the layout of the trauma wing again. Her eyes traced the exits, the corners, the stairwells. She noted weaknesses others might miss: an unsecured supply room, a blind spot in the surveillance cameras, a heavy door that jammed if slammed too quickly. It was meticulous work, subtle adjustments that made the space safer without drawing attention. No one questioned her. The Marines didn't understand that what appeared to be careful hospital management was actually field preparation. She moved quietly to a small storage area to adjust medical supplies, but her ears were attuned to sounds beyond the hospital's walls. From a nearby barracks, distant gunfire, training exercises echoed faintly, but Ava's attention lingered on subtler noises: the irregular hum of a supply truck engine, a door that had clicked shut too softly, the faint shuffle of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she did not act. Yet even her stillness radiated readiness to anyone who might be looking closely. During lunch, the other nurses gathered in the break room, chatting about families, rotations, and rumors from home. Ava sat apart, methodically checking supplies on a tablet, making mental notes and occasionally glancing at security monitors. One young corpsman, curious, asked, "Don't you eat?" She smiled faintly. "I did earlier. Food can wait, people can't." Her words were innocuous, but the tone carried weight. Those who had been under fire before sensed it. Ava had been in situations where hesitation cost lives, where decisions were seconds and not minutes. She carried that experience in every calm breath, every deliberate movement. She had no visible tattoos, no medals, no outward signs of combat history, but her discipline screamed of it. Afternoon brought another emergency. A Marine had collapsed during training, severe heatstroke compounded by dehydration. Ava ran beside the stretcher as corpsmen carried him in. She assessed the situation instantly, directing IV placement, administering cooling measures, and barking precise orders. Within minutes, the man stabilized. Doctors glanced at each other, impressed. "That rookie's something else," one muttered under his breath. But still, no one knew the full truth. Later, Ava conducted a quiet inspection of the perimeter exits. She observed guards, noting who was alert and who relied on rote habit. She tested a few doors for resistance, the locks for delay. It was routine, she told herself, precaution, efficiency. But beneath her calm demeanor, calculations formed. If anyone were to breach this facility, she would be ready. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need thanks. She simply needed to ensure that when it came, when the attack inevitably arrived, lives would be protected. By evening, the hospital began to quiet down. Night shift Marines arrived, replacing fatigued day teams. Ava briefed them succinctly, reviewing patient conditions and updating them on procedural adjustments. No alarms sounded, but her brief pause before dismissing them carried unspoken meaning. She was the center of awareness here. Those who understood that instinctively stayed alert, those who didn't assumed it was confidence. Both would soon learn otherwise. As the sun set over the base, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gray, Ava walked the halls once more. She checked doors, adjusted stretchers, reviewed monitors, and paused near the emergency entrance. From outside, a supply truck idled longer than usual. The driver didn't move. Ava observed the subtle details, the irregularities the Marines would miss. She didn't react, only recorded them mentally. Planning, always planning. In her quarters that night, Ava reviewed trauma reports and layouts once again. Her uniform was neat, her gear in place. To anyone walking past, she appeared to be a diligent, capable nurse. But beneath the surface, she was calculating, rehearsing possibilities. She was waiting, readying herself for the moment the hospital would no longer be safe. Because Ava Morgan didn't exist here merely as a nurse. She existed to protect, to defend, to act when others could not. And the danger she anticipated, the one the Marines dismissed, was coming closer with every passing second. When that moment arrived, she would not hesitate. The third week of Ava Morgan's tenure passed under an uneasy rhythm. The hospital had fallen into a routine, yet Ava sensed a subtle shift in the air, one that others failed to notice. Morning rounds began with the usual reports: minor injuries from training exercises, a few heat casualties, a handful of Marines recovering from minor shrapnel wounds. The staff moved efficiently, but Ava's eyes scanned far beyond the immediate concerns. Every detail mattered, because she knew the enemy didn't announce their approach. They struck silently, at the exact moment when complacency was strongest. During a supply delivery, she noticed irregularities. A truck arrived 10 minutes early, engine idling too quietly. The driver, a civilian contractor, carried himself with a stiffness that suggested nervousness, not casual labor. Ava observed him from the shadowed side of the entrance, nodding his glances toward security cameras, the subtle shift in his weight, the way he avoided the camera's field of view. She didn't raise the alarm. She didn't act yet. But she remembered, cataloged, calculated. Inside the hospital, the day carried on, but Ava's awareness never wavered. She inspected medical instruments, watched patients, and observed the staff's routines. Small deviations stood out. A nurse who moved too quickly past a hallway corner, a janitor lingering near a rarely used door, an ambulance parked a few meters too far from the standard unloading zone. No one else noticed. They were preoccupied, lulled by familiarity. Ava, however, remembered lessons from previous deployments. Threats often came in layers. The obvious distraction masked the true danger. By midday, the tension grew palpable to Ava, though invisible to others. She adjusted patient placement subtly, moving those requiring critical care closer to locked wards. Wheelchairs were repositioned as defensive barriers. Stretchers were angled to create subtle cover lines. Every adjustment had a dual purpose: efficiency in case of emergencies and tactical advantage if attackers breached the building. A passing Marine commented on her precision. "You're obsessive," he said. Ava smiled faintly. "Efficiency," she replied and walked on. Late in the afternoon, she noticed the first human signs of danger. A civilian visitor, unaccompanied and unfamiliar to the hospital staff, lingered near the children's recovery wing. He carried a small bag but avoided direct eye contact. Ava's instincts, honed through years of covert operations, flared. She didn't approach him. She didn't alarm anyone. Instead, she memorized his route, the weight of his movements, his pauses. Each subtle motion told her more than he could possibly imagine. Meanwhile, intelligence reports trickled in from base command, fragmented, incomplete. Enemy activity was noted near the outskirts of the region. No mention of attacks on medical facilities. The senior officers remained confident. Hospitals were sacred, the attackers wouldn't dare. Ava disagreed. Her instincts screamed differently. She moved through the hospital quietly, checking exits, evaluating blind spots, counting personnel, and running silent contingency plans in her mind. If the enemy entered, she knew where the first line of defense needed to be, and who would need guidance to survive. During a brief lull, she observed night shift Marines arriving early to relieve their counterparts. She noted fatigue, distraction, and a lack of situational awareness in several guards. Some glanced at phones, others laughed at minor jokes, unaware of the potential for disaster. Ava's eyes softened briefly, not in fear but in calculated concern. She didn't scold them, didn't overtly assert authority. Instead, she quietly positioned herself to compensate. If the enemy came tonight, she would be the line between order and chaos. By evening, Ava walked the corridors alone, passing through wards filled with wounded soldiers, their steady beeping monitors, and the low hum of oxygen machines. She paused near the emergency entrance and observed the supply truck again. Its engine was still running. The driver remained inside. Ava noted the irregularities, the subtle cues that suggested preparation, not coincidence. Her hand hovered near her belt, not for medical instruments, but for a moment when action would be unavoidable. Throughout the hospital, everything seemed normal to others. Doctors performed rounds, nurses checked vitals, and the wounded rested. Yet Ava's perception was different. She could see danger in ordinary routines. A stretcher left near a narrow doorway, a corridor partially obstructed, cameras with blind spots that seemed trivial. Each detail was a puzzle piece. She positioned herself mentally to control these variables, to protect patients, and to orchestrate defense without revealing her true identity. Ava's calm masked tension, her efficiency concealed preparation. If anyone had questioned her, she would have smiled and shrugged, repeating the familiar word: efficiency. But inside, calculations ran constantly. Who would need guidance, how to evacuate key patients where potential entry points existed, and how to neutralize threats before they reached the wounded. She anticipated multiple scenarios simultaneously, every contingency layered over the other. As night approached, Ava reviewed the hospital's trauma wing one final time. Emergency exits were double-checked, barriers subtly reinforced, and equipment moved into strategic positions. She paused at the main hallway, listening to the distant hum of the base. The night was calm, but in her mind the attack had already begun. Each irregularity she had observed, from the early supply truck to the nervous civilian, formed a mosaic of warning signs. Ava Morgan, to everyone else, remained the rookie nurse. Quiet, competent, unassuming. But to those who understood danger, she was a sentinel, prepared to defend the most vulnerable under her care. Her instincts told her the moment was coming. The enemy would strike soon, and when they did, no one would be ready except her. And she would not hesitate. The night had grown heavy over the base, the desert air still and deceptively calm. Inside the hospital, Ava Morgan moved quietly through the trauma wing, checking on patients and ensuring supplies were in place. Nothing seemed amiss to the staff or the Marines on duty. Yet Ava's instincts vibrated like an electric current under her skin. Every sound, the soft creak of a floorboard, the faint rustle near the supply entrance, registered in her mind. Then came the first unmistakable warning. The distant pop of gunfire echoed from the perimeter, quickly followed by a louder, sharper series of cracks, automatic weapons. Staff froze. Marines glanced at one another, confused, unsure if this was a drill. Ava didn't hesitate. She moved with precision, her calm cutting through the sudden panic like a blade. "Everyone stay down. Move patients to secure rooms now." Her voice, steady yet commanding, carried authority beyond rank or expectation. The words were simple, but the tone demanded obedience. Corpsmen and nurses froze for only a second before snapping into action, guided by her silent confidence. From the hospital's main entrance, chaos erupted. A squad of armed men stormed through the gates, shouting orders in a harsh, foreign language. Their weapons gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The hospital, once a place of safety, transformed in seconds into a battlefield. Ava assessed the situation instantly. The attackers were trained, coordinated, and moving methodically to cut off exits. She mentally mapped their positions, identified choke points, and anticipated likely paths. Her movements were efficient, lethal in their precision, though no one outside her awareness understood why. She moved first to the trauma wing, barricading doors with stretchers, wheelchairs, and medical carts. Oxygen tanks were positioned as makeshift barricades. Patients were moved away from windows. Every adjustment bought precious seconds. A Marine tried to engage one of the attackers near the lobby. Ava intercepted him with a firm hand. "Stay with the patients. Follow my orders," she barked. The Marine hesitated, shock registering on his face, then obeyed. Her tone conveyed the unspoken truth. She knew what she was doing, and they would survive if they trusted her. In one motion, she disarmed an assailant attempting to breach the ICU. The man was armed, aggressive, and unaware that Ava's reflexes were honed for moments like this. Her strike was precise, using the attacker's momentum against him, rendering him unconscious before he could fire a shot. Another Marine witnessed it and gasped. She's not just a nurse," he whispered, eyes wide. Ava moved down the central corridor, directing Marines and staff with short tactical commands. "Left wing secure. Cover the rear exit. Block the corridor." Her presence shifted the hospital from panic to a controlled defense. Patients, once helpless, now had indirect protection. Every movement she made was calculated to save lives while neutralizing the threat. The attackers split, attempting to flank the hospital. Ava anticipated it, positioning herself and the Marines along predictable paths. Her familiarity with tactical layouts, escape routes, and defensive principles, skills no ordinary nurse possessed, turned the tide in the Marines' favor. Injured soldiers found cover behind gurneys. Corpsmen carried medical kits as improvised shields. Ava coordinated every action with precision. Despite the chaos, Ava maintained her calm. Bullets pinged off walls, shouts reverberated through the hallways, screams of fear punctuated the night. Yet she moved like a conductor orchestrating a deadly symphony. She used her environment to maximum advantage, creating bottlenecks, forcing attackers into predictable positions, and protecting the wounded. At one point, a Marine tried to assist a group of attackers pushing toward a critical ward. Ava intercepted him with urgency. "No," she snapped. "Patience first. Defense second. Move." Her voice left no room for argument. The Marine hesitated, then nodded. He realized instinctively that Ava's judgment would determine survival. Through it all, she remained silent about her identity. No one yet knew she was more than a nurse. She didn't need to announce it. Her actions revealed her skill, but the shock would come later. Her mind calculated angles, exit strategies, and likely contingencies. Every second counted. Every choice could save or cost lives. By the time reinforcements from base security began to mobilize, Ava had already stabilized the situation. Patients were safe. Attackers were disoriented, and the hospital had become a defensible fortress. Marines followed her instructions without question, fully reliant on her judgment. And then, in the midst of the firefight, the final realization hit. Ava was not simply a nurse. The precision of her movements, her uncanny anticipation of enemy tactics, and her unshakable calm under fire revealed her true nature. She was trained, experienced, lethal, and the hospital, which had seemed vulnerable seconds before, was now a place of sanctuary. The attackers, frustrated and confused by the unexpected resistance, began to retreat. Yet Ava did not lower her guard. Her eyes scanned every corridor, every room, every shadow. The threat was not over. She knew they would regroup, attempt a final strike, or retreat for a larger assault. She would be ready. Through the chaos, one Marine finally spoke aloud, almost to himself. Who is she?" His voice trembled with disbelief and awe. Others, too, began to notice the difference. The rookie nurse they had ignored, underestimated, and laughed at was not only surviving, they were following her lead. Ava didn't answer. There was no time. There never had been. The hospital was under fire and she had a mission: protect the wounded, coordinate the defense, and eliminate threats. And she would do it without hesitation. Gunfire echoed down the hospital corridors, punctuated by the panicked screams of wounded Marines and staff scrambling for cover. The attackers had split into smaller teams, attempting to overwhelm the wards and isolate patients. Ava Morgan moved like a shadow through the chaos, her calm and precision unshakable. Every step, every gesture, every command had purpose. She redirected Marines to block entry points, positioned stretchers as barriers, and guided corpsmen to protect the most critical patients first. A Marine carrying a stretcher tripped, sending the patient sprawling. Ava reacted instantly, steadying the gurney, giving quick directions. Shift left, brace here, block the hall. Her voice was calm but authoritative, slicing through panic like a scalpel. The Marine glanced at her, shock on his face. She moved as if instinct alone dictated every action, a combination of calculation and reflex honed over years most in the hospital could never imagine. Then it happened. A heavily armed attacker charged down the central corridor toward the ICU, aiming directly at a group of wounded Marines. Ava intercepted him mid-stride, using a technique so precise it left him disarmed and incapacitated in seconds. The Marine witnessing it froze, eyes wide, muttering, She's not just a nurse." The attack had revealed her skills, but the full truth remained hidden. Ava continued issuing orders, coordinating the defense with surgical accuracy. She moved from corridor to ward, directing Marines and staff, each motion measured, each choice calculated. The enemy was well trained, but Ava anticipated their tactics, blocking exits, cutting off flanks, and turning the hospital's architecture into a defensive advantage. Then, amid the chaos, one of the attackers attempted a surprise maneuver from a side hallway. Ava had already predicted the move. She intercepted the enemy leader, disarming him swiftly. As she restrained him, her words were calm but deliberate. "You are finished. Leave this place or face consequences." The enemy, bewildered and overpowered, froze. It was then that a young Marine dared to ask aloud, unable to contain his disbelief. Who are you really?" Ava's eyes flicked to him. The moment had come. There was no time to conceal her identity, and truth was a weapon as powerful as any rifle. "I am a Navy SEAL," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of authority and experience. The words struck like lightning. Marines froze, disbelief spreading like wildfire. The quiet, unassuming rookie nurse, the one they had dismissed, joked about, and ignored, was a fully trained operator from the United States Navy SEALs, embedded undercover. Shock rippled through the room. For a moment the chaos seemed to freeze. Attacking soldiers had no expectation of encountering such a force within the hospital. The Marines, previously unsure and panicked, found their confidence restored instantly. If a Navy SEAL was leading the defense, survival wasn't just possible, it was likely. Ava didn't pause to explain further. Words were unnecessary. Her actions spoke louder than titles. She continued to move with precision, directing Marines to hold positions, secure patients, and anticipate every enemy maneuver. The attackers, confused and increasingly frustrated, realized they had underestimated the hospital's defenses. Left corridor blocked the doors. ICU patients first. Ava's commands were precise, delivered with authority no rank could replicate. Every Marine instinctively followed, placing themselves and patients in protective positions. Her reputation, though unknown, was validated in the heat of combat. Meanwhile, she confronted another attacker attempting to breach a supply room containing critical medical equipment. She used his momentum against him, flipping him into a wall and disarming him in a fluid motion. The Marine watching whispered, almost reverently, "She's a warrior." Others began to understand. This was not a woman who had merely memorized procedures. This was a combat professional who had walked the battlefields they only read about in briefings. Her movements, tactical and deliberate, transformed the hospital from a site of vulnerability into a fortress. Every corner became defensible, every hallway a controlled battlefield. The attackers, realizing they were facing an opponent far beyond their expectations, faltered. Their coordination broke under pressure. Ava capitalized immediately, ordering flanking Marines to isolate groups and secure patients. Some of the Marines finally began to understand what they had been witnessing all along. The quiet, calm, efficient rookie nurse had moved like a predator among chaos, always one step ahead. The attacks that might have been catastrophic were now being neutralized. Yet Ava's mind remained several steps ahead. She knew the fight wasn't over, there would be a final push. She anticipated fallback positions, calculated enemy regrouping strategies, and reinforced defenses without pause. Each movement, each command, reinforced a single truth. She was not only a nurse in title. She was the hospital's guardian, the Marine's anchor, and the attacker's nightmare. In the midst of gunfire and screams, she spoke to a young corpsman who hesitated in fear. "Stay low, follow my lead, protect the patients." Her calm authority left no room for argument. He obeyed, marveling silently at her composure. The revelation of Ava's true identity was no mere shock, it was a lifeline. The Marines, inspired by her skill and leadership, found courage and focus. The attackers, in turn, faced an enemy far more capable than anticipated. The tide of the battle shifted in those moments, all because one quiet, unassuming nurse was, in fact, a Navy SEAL. And though the firefight raged, one thought dominated Ava's mind: protect the wounded, neutralize the attackers, and ensure that every life in this hospital made it through the night. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the real fight had only just begun. The gunfire had ebbed slightly, but the hospital remained a war zone. Smoke curled through the hallways, alarms blared intermittently, and wounded Marines groaned from stretchers. Ava Morgan, calm and focused, moved swiftly from room to room. Her eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, anticipating enemy movements that even the most alert Marines could not detect. Every decision she made carried weight. One mistake could cost lives. "Barricade the west wing," she commanded, her voice carrying authority without hesitation. Stretchers, carts, and wheelchairs were arranged to create defensive choke points. Oxygen tanks and medical equipment, normally neutral tools, became barriers and improvised shields. She positioned the Marines strategically, some hidden behind doors, others at key intersections, all ready to intercept intruders. Each action was deliberate, rehearsed in her mind from countless simulations and real-world operations. A group of wounded soldiers huddled near the emergency exit. Ava moved quickly, crouching beside them. "Stay down, keep quiet, don't move unless I tell you." Her tone was sharp but reassuring. She checked their vital signs as efficiently as she issued instructions. Even in the midst of chaos, she maintained a level of control that inspired confidence. For these Marines, she was the line between survival and catastrophe. Through the smoke-filled corridors, small teams of attackers continued probing, attempting to flank the defenders. Ava anticipated every move. She repositioned her Marines silently, directing them to vantage points and ensuring every potential breach was covered. Her calculations accounted for human behavior as well as physical layout, which entrances attackers were likely to target first, which rooms offered advantageous cover, which paths they might use to reach critical patients. One Marine, young and trembling, hesitated before advancing toward a barricade. Ava knelt, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Trust me, follow my lead, you're not alone." The soldier inhaled sharply, nodding. Confidence, once absent, returned in the face of her certainty. Ava's leadership wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. She anchored the hospital's morale as surely as she anchored its defenses. In a storage corridor, she noticed movement. Two attackers, separated from the main group, tried to bypass a blocked hallway. Without hesitation, Ava intercepted them. Her movements were precise. A sweep of the arm to disarm, a calculated push to incapacitate. The men went down silently, incapacitated before they could trigger an alarm. A Marine who witnessed it whispered, awestruck, How is she doing this?" Ava didn't answer. There was no time. Her mind was already planning the next steps. She moved to the central nursing station, using the monitors to track hallways and entrances. Every camera feed was analyzed instantly. She recognized patterns in the attackers' behavior, predicting their next moves. When she saw a figure attempting to enter a patient room from an unexpected angle, she dispatched a Marine to intercept, then reinforced the corridor with obstacles before the enemy could adjust. Her strategy extended beyond mere defense. Ava realized the attackers were trying to separate the hospital staff from the patients. She established safe zones within the building, rooms where the wounded could be guarded, routes to evacuate them if necessary, and fallback positions for her Marines. She coordinated movement silently, using hand signals and brief commands that required no explanation. Every action minimized risk, optimized protection, and maintained momentum against the attackers. Meanwhile, the attackers began to realize that they were facing a far more formidable opponent than anticipated. Their advance was methodical but slowed, disrupted repeatedly by barricades, hidden Marines, and the silent, precise strikes of Ava herself. They had expected disarray, confusion, fear, but instead they encountered discipline, anticipation, and an enemy who seemed always one step ahead. Ava's mind never rested. She considered contingencies. What if reinforcements didn't arrive in time? What if the attackers regrouped for a coordinated push? What if a critical patient was exposed? Each scenario was visualized, each response planned. She silently rehearsed movements, reallocating personnel and resources as conditions changed in real time. Her presence had transformed the hospital. Where panic had reigned, order now existed. Where vulnerability had threatened, confidence now held. Every Marine under her direction moved with purpose. Every corpsman and nurse understood instinctively the priority: protect the patients, follow orders, survive. Ava's leadership extended beyond instruction. It became a force multiplier, allowing even the least experienced personnel to perform above their capabilities. The attackers tried to regroup, to coordinate a final strike, but Ava anticipated their movements. She positioned her forces in overlapping defensive arcs, ensuring no corridor, door, or hallway could be exploited without consequence. Each decision, each placement of personnel or obstacle, increased the attacker's risk and decreased the likelihood of civilian or patient casualties. By now, the hospital had become a fortress, not just of walls but of strategy and determination. Ava's foresight had preserved lives, limited chaos, and contained the threat. Yet she knew the final confrontation was inevitable. The remaining attackers, frustrated and desperate, would attempt one last push. Ava prepared silently, aware that the ultimate test of skill, courage, and leadership was approaching. Her calm, precise, and relentless efficiency was the anchor for everyone inside the hospital. Each Marine, each corpsman, each wounded patient now had a chance to survive because of her. And when the final wave came, Ava Morgan would be ready to meet it head-on, guiding her forces with unwavering authority, tactical genius, and lethal precision. Because this fight was far from over, and in the heart of the hospital, one quiet nurse, the Navy SEAL they had all underestimated, was ready to ensure that no life would be lost under her watch. The hospital was silent for only a heartbeat before the final wave struck. The attackers, regrouped and desperate, surged toward the main operating wing. Gunfire rattled against walls, alarms blared, and smoke curled through the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Marines braced behind barricades, corpsmen crouched over stretchers, and wounded soldiers clutched weakly at any cover they could find. Ava Morgan stood at the center of the chaos, a calm eye in a storm of panic. "Hold your positions. Don't let them split the wards," she shouted, her voice carrying authority and certainty. Every Marine obeyed instinctively. Her earlier preparations had transformed the hospital into a defensive network. Corridors became kill zones, choke points funneled attackers into predictable paths, and every door, stretcher, and cart was positioned to maximize protection for the wounded. A group of attackers attempted to flank the ICU, but Ava anticipated it. She signaled a Marine to cover a side entrance while she advanced toward the corridor where the enemy leader was likely to strike. Her movement was silent but lethal, every step calculated, every gesture deliberate. She had trained for moments like this, where hesitation meant death and precision meant survival. The enemy leader emerged from the shadows, weapon raised, eyes filled with determination. He had expected fear. Instead, he found a woman who moved with confidence, skill, and absolute control. Ava met his gaze, steady, unwavering, unafraid. The corridor between them became a stage for confrontation, one that would decide the outcome of the battle. The attacker fired. Ava ducked, rolled, and closed the distance in seconds, striking with precision trained through years of combat. The clash was brutal and close. No gunfire, only skill, timing, and calculated force. The leader attempted to push her back, but Ava used his momentum against him, flipping him into a barricade. His weapon skidded across the floor. She disarmed him with a swift motion, pinning him to the ground. Behind her, Marines and staff fought off smaller groups of attackers, inspired by her skill. Patients were protected, corridors were secure, and the attackers' momentum faltered under the combined pressure of her strategy and the Marines' newly renewed confidence. The enemy leader struggled, but Ava's hold was unyielding. "This ends now," she said, her voice calm, precise, and commanding. The man realized he was outmatched, not by numbers, but by skill, anticipation, and resolve. Every attack he made was countered, every escape route anticipated. Ava's presence had shifted the balance entirely. Outside the operating wing, the remaining attackers attempted to regroup, but the Marines held their positions under her guidance. They had learned quickly: follow Ava, survive. Each command she issued was executed with precision, transforming chaos into order. The battle, fierce and intense, reached its crescendo. Smoke and dust filled the air, alarms shrieked, every wall reverberated with the sounds of struggle. Yet through it all, Ava remained the center of control. Her mind calculated angles, probabilities, and contingencies. She directed Marines to intercept attackers, to protect the wounded, and to contain threats before they could escalate. At last, the enemy leader ceased struggling. Disarmed, overpowered, and confronted by a force he had underestimated, he was forced to submit. Ava released him only after confirming he posed no further immediate threat. The remaining attackers, demoralized and scattered, either surrendered or fled. The hospital, once a target of chaos, now stood firm, scarred but intact. Ava turned to check on the wounded, ensuring every patient was safe, every Marine accounted for. She moved quickly, efficiently, directing corpsmen to stabilize those who had been injured during the final wave. Her attention to detail was tireless, each movement purposeful, every instruction delivered calmly despite exhaustion. By the time base reinforcements arrived, the immediate threat had been neutralized. The attackers had been repelled, the hospital secured, and lives saved that would otherwise have been lost. Marines and staff looked around, taking stock of the aftermath. Broken glass, scattered debris, scorched walls, but no loss among the patients, thanks to the unwavering strategy and skill of one person. A Marine approached her, finally finding words after the adrenaline faded. I don't even know what to say. You saved us all." His voice trembled. Ava gave a faint nod, brushing past him without response. Titles and explanations would come later. Right now, there was only survival. Other Marines began to realize the full scope of what had happened. The rookie nurse they had underestimated, who had quietly blended into the background, had not only anticipated every move of a trained enemy squad, but had personally disarmed and incapacitated the enemy leader. Her skill, calm under pressure, and tactical genius had turned what could have been a massacre into a controlled defense. Even the wounded, still weak and bandaged, recognized the change in atmosphere. Fear had been replaced with awe, despair with relief. The hospital was alive because Ava Morgan had been present, prepared, and in command. As the dust settled and reinforcements secured the perimeter, Ava walked slowly through the halls. Broken equipment and overturned carts littered the floors, but the patients were safe. Marines followed her lead instinctively, understanding in a new way why she had been assigned here. She didn't boast, didn't celebrate, didn't ask for recognition. Her work was done, and she moved with the quiet efficiency that had defined her from the start. The final confrontation had passed. The enemy had been defeated. The hospital, the patients, and the Marines had survived. But for Ava, there was no pause, no rest. Her mind was already reviewing what had occurred, planning contingencies for what might come next. Survival had been achieved, yes, but strategy and preparedness were never complete. She looked at the Marines, some still shaking, some tending to wounded comrades. They had witnessed her skill firsthand. They now knew the truth. The nurse they had ignored, underestimated, and dismissed was a Navy SEAL, trained for moments just like this, and the hero who had turned chaos into victory. And even in the quiet after the storm, her presence radiated authority, competence, and unyielding strength. The hospital would stand. The wounded would survive. And the story of that night of calm precision in the face of chaos would remain etched in memory long after the smoke cleared. By dawn, the chaos of the night had faded, leaving a hospital that bore the marks of battle. Smoke lingered in corners, alarms had been silenced, and debris from overturned carts and shattered glass littered the hallways. Yet remarkably, all patients remained safe. Marines moved carefully among stretchers, checking vital signs and whispering reassurances to those too weak to rise. Amid the quiet aftermath, Ava Morgan walked through the corridors, surveying the results of her efforts. To everyone else, she remained the calm, efficient nurse who had commanded attention without appearing to. To the Marines, she was something more, a force of nature who had saved lives when every second counted. She moved with quiet purpose, ensuring every patient was attended to, every weapon secured, and every threat neutralized. Her eyes, sharp and alert even in exhaustion, scanned the halls for anything overlooked. As the base reinforcements arrived, Ava directed them silently, pointing out where additional security and medical support were needed. Every instruction she gave was precise, deliberate, leaving no room for error. The new arrivals, trained soldiers and medics alike, followed her lead without hesitation. They quickly understood that she was the linchpin of the hospital's survival during the attack. Marines who had survived the night began to grasp the full extent of what had occurred. They had witnessed a nurse disarm a trained enemy, anticipate every movement, and coordinate a defense that turned a likely massacre into a controlled victory. Whispers spread, "She's not just a nurse, and she saved us all." Yet Ava offered no explanation. Her work was not about recognition. It had always been about survival. As the wounded were stabilized and the last of the attackers were detained or had fled, Ava moved toward the main entrance. Outside, the rising sun cast a pale glow over the base, illuminating the desert sand and the hospital's scarred facade. Marines paused, catching sight of her silhouette. Their admiration was quiet, respectful, and tinged with awe. Many had underestimated her. Many had dismissed her presence. And now they understood that she had been the one anchor keeping them all alive. A young Marine approached her cautiously, hesitating before speaking. "Lieutenant Morgan, we owe you everything. You saved lives tonight that should have been lost." His voice wavered both with relief and disbelief. Ava gave a faint nod, a small acknowledgement rather than praise. She had no need for gratitude, no desire for accolades. She had acted out of duty, training, and instinct. Her satisfaction came from seeing the wounded secure and the attackers neutralized. The hospital staff began to reorganize, tending to minor injuries and replacing supplies. Nurses whispered about the night's events, marveling at her composure, her skill, her decisiveness. The junior corpsmen who had once hesitated in fear now carried themselves with renewed confidence, guided by her example. Every life saved, every Marine protected, was a testament to her calm under pressure. By mid-morning, the last of the patients had been attended to, and the hospital returned to its routine rhythm. Yet the memory of the night remained fresh. Broken equipment had been replaced, corridors cleared, and medical stations restocked. Ava walked silently among her colleagues, checking that all protocols were in place, that nothing had been overlooked. She moved not as a hero seeking recognition, but as a professional ensuring that her responsibilities were fulfilled. As the day progressed, Ava gathered her personal gear. Her uniform was neat, her medical supplies packed, her tactical equipment checked. There was no fanfare, no official ceremony. Her presence had altered the course of the night, but she did not linger for applause. She was a soldier and a guardian first, a nurse second, and she had a mission to complete elsewhere. A Marine stepped forward, saluting with formal respect. "Lieutenant Morgan, sir, permission to say farewell." His voice carried genuine admiration. Ava returned the salute, crisp and unwavering. "Carry on," she said simply. No more words were needed. The Marine watched her leave, realizing fully that the quiet nurse they had ignored for weeks was the one who had ensured their survival. Outside, the desert wind whispered over the hospital grounds. Ava walked toward her extraction point, her silhouette small against the rising sun. The hospital, scarred from battle, would endure, and the Marines would recover, strengthened by the night's lessons. She would not be there for congratulations, for stories retold, or for medals pinned to her chest. Her duty was complete, and she moved on quietly, leaving a legacy embedded in action rather than words. The Marines watched until she disappeared from view. They had learned a vital lesson. Heroes do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they stand silently beside you, calm and prepared, until the moment you need them most. They would tell stories of that night, of the hospital under siege, and of the unassuming nurse who moved with the skill and courage of a seasoned warrior. In the days and weeks that followed, the hospital healed. Injuries were treated, protocols reinforced, and security measures upgraded. Yet the memory of Ava Morgan's presence remained indelible. Marines shared their accounts, describing the tactical precision, the calm leadership, and the lethal efficiency that had saved them all. The legend of the Navy SEAL posing as a nurse would grow quietly, a story whispered among soldiers who understood the value of courage under fire. By noon, Ava had left the base. Her mission had concluded, and she disappeared into the anonymity she preferred. The hospital, the patients, and the Marines survived because of her skill, foresight, and bravery. And though she would not be celebrated publicly, her actions resonated far beyond the hospital walls. In every life saved, in every Marine inspired, her legacy endured. And somewhere far from the desert base, Ava Morgan prepared for her next mission, quiet, composed, and ready, knowing that the work of a guardian never truly ends.